Welcome to my online show where I talk about things that I don't have a degree in and I have no education on. So today there will be mild spoilers for Nosferatu, but as you'll learn in this video, this is a tale as old as time. So if you don't know what happens in the movie, genuinely, that's crazy. Usually when I'm watching a movie, I need to ask myself a fundamental question about what kind of movie I'm watching. So, is this movie saying something that's interesting to me? Is it asking a broader question? Is it something that I can really kind of analyze in my own head and think something deeper of? Sometimes a movie is just fun and it's just entertaining and it's not really a lot to chew on. Every movie is political in its own way, but sometimes there's more there than there is at other times. But one thing is for certain about Robert Eggers films, and I just know I can fully expect there to be some kind of deeper meaning and some kind of thing to chew on, something that I'm not going to notice until my fifth rewatch of the movie, and something that I can really obsess over and know that somebody was putting thought and detail into every single part of a movie. That's the thing about his films. You can always expect that, and that's something that is a huge achievement, and it's just beautiful to watch. That's something that's really valuable to me because horror is looked at as unserious or useless or too gross. I've been called a number of horrible things. I've had people paste Bible verses into my comments. I've had DMs that were really weird and kind of trying to get me to stay away from the devil, which is horror movies. I've had crazy stuff said to me, and I'm not even a big creator, but it's my opinion that horror creates some of the most revolutionary and progressive ideas in its genre, and it always has. So obviously I loved Nosferatu, and Nosferatu is no different than any of his other films. It's incredible through and through, obviously. And my first review of the film, having seen it once on Christmas Day, the font alone being a custom typeface that somebody was hired to create, that alone should have been enough for me to already know this was going to be great. But today I want to talk more about what the movie means to me, my personal opinion, and why it isn't just haunting and beautiful, but why it might be the best movie of 2024, and I'd be really surprised if something could top this. Even the substance, I genuinely would be surprised. And why it is perfect for 2024 to remake this movie and why we needed it badly. It's just perfect timing. I don't know why. I don't know if that's cosmic or that's planned, but the timing of it is just fantastic. Before I get into cultural analysis, I kind of want to talk about how much fucking work went into this movie. I just need to talk about the costume design and the sets. They literally recreated 19th century Germany and Transylvania, built these sets that were pretty much historically accurate. The houses even have a certain amount of sag and wear and tear, they've been lived in. And when you see these houses in the first few scenes, it's a bustling port town. And then they subtly make the streets feel ominous and frightening because of the manipulation they do to these sets and how they look worn in and saggy. It's actually so incredible. It was shot in the Czech Republic, but they built pretty much all of those streets. They couldn't find a city that had what they wanted, so they literally built it. And they only shot every scene on a cloudy, gloomy day. So none of that CG, it's all actually there, and that's why the movie in part feels so haunting and so realistic. You also have the live rats and the extensive research into every single costume. Costumes are period and character accurate. There's this character who doesn't have a lot of money, so his clothing is partly sewn in kind of patches. So a part from one of his clothes is sewed onto another one of his clothes to finish it off, showing that he doesn't have that much money. And even Nosferatu, Dracula himself, has period accurate clothing to when he would have lived, because obviously Dracula, Nosferatu, is a vampire and he's dead, but he is dressed like a Turkish nobleman of his time. Period accurate. I cannot stress this enough, how incredible it is that they were able to do this in the way that they were, in a time where no one gives a fuck about costume design all of a sudden. No one cares about set design. They did this beautiful, beautiful world building. A direct quote from Eggers is that there's never been a version of Dracula or Nosferatu dressed in period accurate clothing to a 16th century Transylvanian nobleman. Like, that's never happened before, and that's what he would look like because he's dead, and he's been dead since then. Also, beyond the extreme detail that was put into all the sets, they had their shit together when it came to research. They had an occultist come in and check all the books, spells, and paperwork to make sure that it actually was accurate. And they also had a guy who knew everything about Romanian folklore on set, like approving shit that they did, just making sure that everything was accurate. And Bill Skarsgård's voice as Dracula, Nosferatu, was not digitally altered in any way. He literally just worked with an opera coach to make his voice sound like that. So that's just the tip of the iceberg with the acting and how much work the actors put into this as well. But this is just like a beautiful piece of work that really shows that you cannot make a perfect movie without collaboration, and that's like the beauty of film, is that you can't do it by yourself. Now I kind of want to brush on its cultural significance and what the story of Dracula means, because my analysis is not going to really make a lot of sense without this. The original Dracula is by Bram Stoker, and it was written in 1897, and it was a novel, right? And the Nosferatu movie that everyone knows from SpongeBob was a retelling of this novel, but it was an unauthorized retelling, so they had to change a lot of stuff to make it copyright suitable. So Count Dracula became Orlok, other names were changed, and they made the Dracula look rat-like and kind of creepy, and it's obviously an iconic image. But the original novel was built off of the idea of superstition in a really huge way, and also like sexual repression, because we need to also know that these Dracula Nosferatu mediums were made in a time where sexuality was super repressed, and people literally thought that their longing for that was like demons. Like, people were so goddamn repressed. But in the original novel, this like Transylvanian vampire is trying to spread an undead curse, and the curse is very much a metaphor for like fear, and obviously in turn that's attached to death. So the book was the OG. The Nosferatu black and white was the first film retelling, and in this like first film retelling, it's really emphasized how disgusting he looks. Like, this is the most that they could possibly do at the time with practical effects, and it was a lot at the time. And they actually thought he was a real vampire. They thought the actor was a real vampire. So from its beginning, Nosferatu the vampire is quite literally a symbol for our innate fear of death and chaos, and it has been that since the beginning. It's almost like putting all of our fears of those things, including like the plague and just people dying, like putting that fear into a physical thing is cathartic, and it's fun to watch, and people are interested in that. And it's also just like always been a thing. People have always been scared of things they don't understand. Also, in the first film adaptation, they introduced the idea that he's destroyed by sunlight, so that was fully just made up in the movie, and we still believe it to this day about vampires. The second film adaptation was by Todd Browning in 1931, and this introduced the idea that maybe Dracula is like very sexy. So it kind of blended the first Dracula with like a kind of sexy, suave Dracula, but it still very much had themes of despair and just the existential fear of Dracula wanting to spread his death and corruption. So that's still a thing in all the films so far. Now, the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is directed by Francis Ford Coppola. This is probably the one you've seen, because most people have seen this one. Really played into the romance as well, and it's more of like a romantic retelling of the original story, and it's very faithful to the original story. This one really amped up the idea that it was like a torrid love affair, and it was almost like a love triangle situation. It adds this idea that there's true eternal love there. So far we have Dracula representing plagues, allure, and danger, and being exotic, or he's representing existential dread, or even like the fear of societal collapse. No matter how romantic you get with it, Dracula does represent things that the humans that made it at the time were afraid of. So that's kind of the really quick Sparks Notes version of the lore. And I needed to talk about that before I talk about what I think that this 2024 Nosferatu means and why it is different. So imagine you're Robert Eggers and you have like literally 100 years predating you of adaptations of this story. How do you make it different? Why are you making it? And what the fuck else are you gonna say? Because it feels like everything has been said. And I think it's really interesting that we revive this story every few years. Like, this has been a story that people have been remastering and remaking for so long. And I think it is one of the first visions of horror you really see when you're like a kid. You see Dracula. Like, you see Dracula everywhere. He's in the fucking Muppets, I think. It's just a character that sticks. And I want to talk about why, because if you're Robert Eggers and you're an incredible filmmaker, why would you choose this story to remaster? And why would you choose it to do it now? And what's the significance of that? My personal opinion is it's the idea that superstition is timeless, and also we all have the great coping mechanism. Nosferatu from 2024 explores themes of death and lust and repression and the duality of man and religion. But the most interesting thing to me was this idea of superstition and this idea of coping with superstition. And it's the idea that no matter your class or your culture, your location, whatever, the spirit of the supernatural can get you. And I guess I'm trying to say is this Dracula character has been a thing for so long, and I do feel in my heart that it shows that we've been afraid of the chaos of the universe for as long as we have been making media. Like, yes, Nosferatu is a metaphor for the plague and for death, but he represents something larger that has just always been present in human culture. And it's this supernatural feeling of death that feels so large and inevitable. It literally is beyond our physical realm. Like, it's something that feels supernatural to us even in 2024. And no amount of like societal norms or organization can actually remove you from that feeling or save you from the curse of this vampire. To me, it feels like this obsessive idea that we keep revisiting. There were so many instances of like a man's futile attempt to control the beast of death that were so useless, it was literally almost comical. Specifically, there was like these scenes that would contrast like these beautifully designed and made Victorian dresses that just fit perfectly, flowers in Lily Rose Depp's hair that just looked beautiful, they looked perfect. And not only was she tormented by this chaos and this darkness, but these scenes would switch really quickly from a beautiful dress and a beautiful house, beautifully organized and clean house with maids, to a scene of like someone vomiting or dying or rats. It's almost like no matter how much perceived control that we think as humans we have over the mysterious happenings of life, you never actually have control over that chaos. And this vampire character has been a thing for so long, I really do feel, because it's really comfortable for us to explore this dynamic of someone trying to defeat that chaos and that they can't. Like, it's just inevitable. Someone has to sacrifice, someone has to die. You can't control Nosferatu, he's beyond. In this movie, characters get brutally killed. No matter how organized their life is, how clean their uniforms are, their families get destroyed no matter how perfect their family seems. Whether you're literally in a beautiful mansion or you're literally a group of travelers in the woods that are very poor, you have the same chance of survival against Nosferatu. You have the same, you can't escape him no matter what kind of person you are. I think of this scene with Lily Rose Depp, literally she's thrashing as fuck in the bed because she's cursed with this cosmic evil curse, and the doctor literally says to her, you should wear your corset to sleep. Like, you should wear your corset, it promotes good posture, whatever. Like, that is not going to help her at all. And it was almost like he was comforting himself with that idea that he could maybe control it, like with something that will never help her. Like, that is just stupid. It's not gonna help. And I think that scene was really specifically added because of this idea. Like, we're powerless against Nosferatu, we're powerless against this chaos. Willem Dafoe's character, on the other hand, is trying to kind of merge the ideas of science and the supernatural, and he ends up being the most successful because he's aware of this, that we cannot overcome this demon. Like, it's beyond our control. He's basically the only character who seems kind of enlightened or in a semblance of control besides Lily Rose Depp, because he's not, number one, running away from this evil like the travelers in the woods are with like their uber religious praying, and they're like constantly thinking about Nosferatu, constantly praying him away. He's not doing that, but he's also not totally denying his existence at all. He isn't like the scientist ignoring the obvious signs of someone being cursed and the obvious chaos that's happening because of Nosferatu coming to town. Like, he's literally coming. Willem Dafoe's character isn't ignoring any of those things. He's embracing both sides and he's having more balance. I just think this theme is so effective at haunting you because Dracula is not just a creature or a character. It's a reversal of everything we as humans hold dear and that we believe is natural. Like, he's a dead person who's been alive for years and years and years. He's quite literally feasting on people, and he's a perfect example of how we see death. Totally unpredictable and totally inescapable. With its grasp being so large, it's covering entire cities and it's just impossible to escape. So Nosferatu is a creature with fear that is timeless. It feels like every single time this idea is brought up, the characters in this story of Nosferatu are trying to soothe themselves with organized society. But as we have learned in the retelling of this story over and over again, it's that nobody is further away from the chaos than anybody else. And it's a total fool's journey to think that you are. And if you think like, okay, this is a stupid thing that people in the 1800s believed, and this is a theme that people 100 years ago maybe believed, and we're kind of evolved, like we're evolved from them, and we don't need these like comforts to make us feel better. We don't need these stories to make us feel better. We're smarter and we're better. If you don't think we do pointless shit in 2024 to make us feel farther away from the chaos of death, you're so wrong. We do pointless things to give us a sense of control over the chaos of the universe all the time. We do superstitious things all the time. For a specific example, when you're flying on a plane and you're literally thousands of feet in the air, like, it should be enough that we just believe the scientists and we believe the engineers, but it's really not. And it isn't enough for most people to just trust in the scientists and just trust in the people that organize the plane. We make the plane seem organized and civilized with like stewardesses with extreme uniform requirements and stockings and in-flight entertainment and cocktail carts and pilots in a really specific uniform and like this kind of 1960s vibe. We're trying to civilize the sky. Like, if that's not a hint of the supernatural fears that we kind of have always had, I really don't know what is, because we're literally trying to make the sky seem more civilized and less of a total chaos, so we feel more disconnected from the fact that we're hurtling through the sky. Because humans have always done this, and that's why this vampire Nosferatu is so classic, and that's why it is so ripe for audiences now, because we're just as superstitious as we always were. The only difference with audiences now versus in 1800s is that we have deluded ourselves into thinking we can forecast the future. And it's almost like showing this movie now is just another reminder that we cannot. We can't tame the world no matter how much we feel like we can. And it's so easy to forget that nowadays, because in like 1922, you were facing these plagues. Like, when you go on Amazon.com now, you order something and you fully know it's going to be at your doorstep in 2 days. That gives you such a false sense of that you control what's around you, you control the world, or you control even your life. It's literally what the characters in this century-old movie are doing. It's like they're giving themselves a false sense of control over the world. And like, no matter how much you try to ignore this like giant chaos that is, you never know what's going to happen, it doesn't make it go away. And I think that is the beating heart of Robert Eggers films. I think they thrust you into this like unflinching view of a stripped down human existence from so many years ago, from times when we didn't have cameras, so you couldn't really know, with period accurate speech and clothing and sound design, and you have no distractions, no false sense of control. And it's humbling to see how much we are the same amount of superstitious as people were back then, how we haven't really evolved into this like special society. We've always been the same kind of superstitious humans. And in the age of like most people's lives looking the exact same day to day, you've engineered basically a world where you have control over every single thing that happens to you. So do you really think if you were thrust into this universe where Nosferatu's real, do you not think that you would be the person saying that's not real? Like, you would not be the 𝑖ll.ᴑ, you would literally be the person saying, what the fuck, that's definitely not real. Nosferatu's fake and I'm like civilized, I'm above that. I think it's just really funny that no matter the century and no matter the time or the culture, people love to soothe themselves into thinking that we have control. And this movie was dropped at such a perfect time where we can humble ourselves and know that we need to make peace with the total chaos of the universe. Trying to control it and trying to pretend that you have control over everything actually ends up hurting you worse than if you were to just accept that you really don't know. And of course, there are like so many other ideas in this movie other than like this false sense of control and this like superstition. But that was the idea that was the most interesting to me. And I think it was like really making other Robert Eggers movies make more sense to me, because like The Lighthouse and The Witch are so stripped down and haunting, I think for a really specific reason. And it's like, you feel so connected to people that you don't know. And you feel like the same innate fears that they do, and they're so much older than you. Like they died so long ago. It's like, how can you feel so connected to someone that existed at such a different time than you? And that is my Nosferatu analysis. I guarantee you I'm going to rewatch this because I've watched it once. And I guarantee you I'm going to rewatch this and think about all the things that I didn't mention, that I missed, and that I could have said. And that is extremely annoying. And I know myself, and that's exactly what's going to happen. But I need to get some kind of thoughts out there, and I obviously recommend the movie. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a really good night or a really good day, whatever day it is, whatever night it is for you. I'm really excited because I'm working on some like end of the year roundup kind of review videos. I might rank all the movies of the year if you're interested in that. And yeah, I cannot wait for making way more videos in 2025. What the fuck? Why is it 2025?